Ролик, на фильм оно преследует.
I don't know what you've heard, but there's something we should all be talking about. Let's talk about it.
It's now been 8 years since the release of It Follows, and this movie shows no sign of easing its tightly held grip over
And follows, оно преследует на английском.
the collective horror movie consciousness. And yet, the discussions around this movie tend to barely even skim the surface of what makes it such an expertly crafted piece of psychological horror, often reducing its rich subtext to a straightforward and, frankly, far
Фильм.
less interesting
Еще вроде в 14-м, я о нем узнал относительно недавно.
metaphor for the dangers of contracting an STD from unprotected
Год назад, или 2 уже, недавно относительно, лет 10
intercourse. And while I believe wholeheartedly that movies, and all art for that matter, is subjective and therefore free to be interpreted in whichever way speaks loudest to the observer, I also can't help but feel that it's a metaphor for the dangers of unprotected
Я же не вважаю, що можна інтерпретувати вообще як угодно. Некоторые интерпретации, по-моему, не имеют смысла. Какие-то имеют смысл, какие-то нет.
hanky interpretation misses the point and simplifies a movie that is anything but simple when it comes to the hauntingly human truths it dares to explore. And of course, I'm referring to it as hanky-panky only because I care about your fragile ears, not because of YouTube's fragility when it comes to the topic of sex.
Don't say that.
So let's talk about It Follows. Its densely packed deeper meanings, what on earth its confusing ending is trying to tell us, and why that infection you thought was just a harmless little STD is actually much, much worse. But first, It follows Jay, an enjoyer of pools and killing insects in pools, and walking in circles around her neighborhood with her sister, while sniffing her. After planning the parsnip for the first time with her new boyfriend Hugh, Jay realizes she made an oopsie when she wakes up tied to a chair and forced to listen to his strange conspiracy theories.
This thing, it's gonna follow you. Somebody gave it to me, and I passed it to you, back in the car. It can look like anyone, but there's only one of it.
Hugh then makes Jay stare at some drunk naked lady for some reason, before bringing her back home and not even offering to walk her to her doorstep. After being sad about Hugh being all mean and dumping her out of nowhere like that, Jay returns to school ready to move on, only to find that the nice old lady following her doesn't want to give her hugs and cookies. She wants to murder her. It's here Jay realizes that whatever Hugh was smoking, it told him the truth. A shape-shifting shag demon is trying to kill her. Deciding a sleepover is obviously the next best move. Jay's friends keep her company to make sure she's not on drugs. After some unspoken things between Jay and Paul get profoundly spoken,
You're my first kiss, you know.
Jay hears a loud noise in the kitchen, only to find it wasn't the sound of her pizza pockets being
комментировать это именно для комментации очень сложно. Ну, чтобы просто рассказ.
ready. It's actually a half-naked lady peeing on her floor, aka the naughty time demon. Jay then runs upstairs to all her friends' confusion before someone knocks at the door. At first, it appears to just be their friend Yara notifying Jay that her pizza pockets are ready, but it's actually a tall weird man, aka the Stupping demon. But Jay is the only one who can see said Stupping demon, so she hightails it out of there faster than her friends can say where are the drugs. But it's all good in the suburban hood, as her friends decide enabling Jay's delusion is the best way to help her defeat it. So along with some help from Jay's neighbor Greg, who definitely doesn't just want to sleep with Jay, the group tracks Hugh down for some answers.
If it kills her, it gets me. It goes straight down the line to whoever started it.
And also get a side scoop of some helpful advice as well.
If you try far enough, you could buy yourself some time to think. Decide if you want to give it to someone else.
So they drive out to Greg's cabin by the lake, a perfectly normal setting where scary stuff never happens. But then some scary stuff happens, which really turns the crazy dial up on Jay and makes her have an accident with Greg's car. But she can't afford to fix Greg's car, so she sleeps with instead, and passes on that annoying hoo-ha demon in the process. Paul gets all offended about it, but Jay
На пляже тут оно попалось, и реально немножко, знаешь, переживал, думал, что реально может помереть там Саня, в принципе, то, что бы от этого избавиться, то переспала, чтобы продать того монстра по-другому, в принципе, кажется довольно понятным, бо вот там реально в Тисане, не знаю, вот
too preoccupied with thinking she might be crazy on account of Greg has no fear of the squat-thrusting boogeyman.
I believe you.
Ну да, он не верит, потом помрет.
I just don't think it's following me.
But a little fear could have helped Greg, as he eventually gets willy-wetted to death by the wet willy demon. While Jay goes into her emo stage of the whole situation, Paul decides there's no better time than the present to present his alpha male value to her.
Важно, если не веришь,
But Jay
что монстр опас существует, то, может быть, как-то пожил бы дольше.
Deflects his slick moves. So Paul gets creative and thinks up a new strategy to get rid of her bump in the night demon. A foolproof plan that involves putting Jay in a pool, surrounded by electric appliances. But this is no dumb demon. It's a diddle demon, and it knows exactly what to do with the weapons the group provided it with. The group then manages to get the two-person push-up demon in the pool, where it plays footsies with Jay before getting capped by Paul. Even though the biscuit buttering demon seems to perhaps maybe potentially be dead, Jay and Paul...
Какая-то похожа сцена. Там, да, от там на пляжі, де у нього теж вистріла з ружья, і подивилася, чи він виживе. Ну, а та штука, яка послідує, вижила і далі з нею охотилась. Тут похожа сцена, так же певно дивиться, ну, а це ясно показують тільки, що кров по басейні, що, може, тут существо, яке з нею охотилось, уже померло.
Still get it on, an experience which leaves...
Типа хэппи-энд, ну, что, вроде как померло, это, наверное, хэппи-энд, наверное, не уверен.
All sad.
Ну, наверное, понятно, что померло, да, но как-то жизнь главной героини лучше стала, отношается вроде как хэппи-энд, не совсем.
Craving more love.
Главная героиня довольно паршиво ощущается в фильме, на этом мало много работы просто вырубается, вот кто там живет, кажется, тоже не в самом лучшем состоянии. Ну, как бы концовки ощущения, ну, такие смешанные. Оно не совсем воспринимается прям как пен, все отлично, что как будто какая-то тревога остается. Хотя кажется, что монстры все преодолели.
Lovers in lovely new places. After deciding, hey, life sucks, so you might as well pretend you love someone till you die, Jay and Paul march hand in hand together into the end of the movie.
Блять, це мало що так много реклам.
Підтримайте саперів, які повертають красу України.
Jay and Paul march hand in hand together into the end of the movie. The most obvious reason it follows is so quick to be interpreted as an STD metaphor is because, well, at its most surface level, it kind of is.
You're a hypocrite. You're a conformist. You're a liar.
The movie takes the concept of STDs and how they're transmitted from one person to the next and uses it as a gateway into having a far more difficult conversation about the potentially ugly psychological side effects of intercourse. As youngsters, school is quick to warn us of the dangers of contracting diseases from unprotected coupling. But what isn't taught is the psychological decay that can follow when our rose-colored expectations of intercourse are met with crushing disappointment. Which is why when our teachers fail us, horror is there to put a creepy hand on our shoulder and say, I got you, bro.
Your parents might not talk to you about it, but the reality is, it is dangerous.
Before we get neck deep in the rich thematic juices of It Follows, it'll help to first take a quick look at it in the context of writer-director David Robert Mitchell's other films. It Follows acts as the evil middle child in the 3 movies he's released thus far, that, when combined, take us on an overarching journey from childhood to adulthood, with intercourse portrayed...
Пытался посмотреть следующий фильм с этим чалом, который играл Человека-паука, но он довольно-таки мутный в плане непонятности. У меня было ощущение, что полностью его понял. Даже потом какие-то ролики потом на английском пытался объяснить его, но что даже после ролика ощущение, что ты не совсем понял.
As the corrupting factor in between. His first film...
Я бы сказал, что фильм оно преследует более понятно, чем следующий. Следующий более какой-то мутный.
Myth of the American Sleepover.
Я там тоже похожий, там какие-то похожи, но в основном более мутно ощущается.
The last gasp of youthful innocence, just before it's soon to be snuffed out by the myth of profound satisfaction that adult intercourse is so often built up to be in the minds of teenagers. There's a nostalgic, melancholic tone to this laid-back dramedy as the characters flirt with losing their innocence, before ultimately opting to hold on to it for just a little bit longer.
And trick you into giving up your childhood, all these promises of adventure. Once you realize what you lost, it's too late. Can't get it back.
Which then hard swerves us into the much bleaker world of
Не знаю.
It Follows, where the official...
Так ли плохо в заследе? Заслед есть свои плюсы, вы независимы от родителей. Заслед есть свои плюсы, но с него в фильмах в основном, я так понимаю, на минусах. Ну, минусы, конечно, тоже есть, но плюсы тоже довольно мало. Это вы независимы, потому что ребенка бы ты можешь отстроить, то, что тебе все решают, отправить в школу, да-то в садик совсем мелкий. Тому, в принципе, детство имело своих проблем. Не назвал бы детство там совсем уж лучшей порой в жизни. Минусов тоже хватало. Но в взрослой жизни тоже, да, проблеми, яких немає в детстве. Ну, в детстве інші проблеми, яких немає в взрослой жизни. Ну, тут как-то сложно понять, что реально лучше, потому что в детстве одни проблемы, в жизни немножко другие проблемы. понятно прям, що значно лучше сложно. Це много плюсів в тому смислі, що в тебе дуже багато нового, тому що в тебе ж немає такого жизненного опита. Но з возрастом, конечно, глаз замилюється, вже мало що так дивує, як в дитинстві, но мінус в дитинстві теж є, як я казав, це те, що тебе контролюють родителі, куди йти, в школу, з возрастом ти куди більш независимий.
Passage from childhood to adulthood by way of intercourse is examined through the dark lens of horror, as its young characters are confronted with the ugly truth behind the
Мінуси, основно би сказав, мінуси взагалі, як у мене, це те, що чим ти більше росліє, тим більше розумієш, наскільки мір, який тебе оточує, не ідеалі, скільки много є дурних людей, скільки много є всяких проблем, не знаю, там, з кліматом, війни, всякі там.
glamorized myth of intercourse. Finally, under the Silver Lake,
Ти взагалі не слухаєш, що інші люди, що з волосу ти кажеш, що ті люди дурні, може це якийсь чур, ти слухаєш. В дитинстві взагалі по-моєму не слухаєш, що говорять. Взрослі внимательно, тому в дитинстві в мене не було мислі, що взрослі очень умні, на некоторих дітей є, но при этом, що вони совсем тупые, не казалось, но так ты устаешь, кажется, ты совсем...
conspiracy thriller that takes place in the post-corruption of Innocence era shows adult life as
Когда ты взрослый, то думаешь, как бы реализоваться в жизни или что-то достичь, а если ты просто думаешь, просто играешь, там куда меньше требований к себе, и будто с собою куда проще. В детстве від тебе тільки требують, там, не знаю, йду в школу, будь чемний, еще что-то, там, помагай, еще что-то. А коли ти вже старший, ти починаєш більше від себе требувати. Як в дитинстві ти себе нічого не требуєш, ти просто живеш. І немає мислити, типу, що там реалізовуватися, чи ще що-то.
and empty, if not for the Hollywood and mega entertainment marketing machines keeping us busy and distracted by appealing to our need to search for hidden meaning and patterns in every...
У него не совсем притон, у него там, да, по фильмах про взросление, но не совсем по то, что я говорю.
Obsessed with video games, secret codes. Used to be 100 years ago. You know, any moron could kind of wander to the woods and look behind a rock and just...
Сильное общество, мне кажется, все еще многие играют в игры 30-летние.
Ever some cool new thing. Not anymore. Where's the mystery that makes everything worthwhile? We crave mystery because there's none.
Можна тому
We crave mystery.
80-м, бо наше покоління, яке може так к лучшему. Прежде покоління мені теж особо нравилося. Може современне, яке чуть медленно зустріє, чим попереднє, може так к лучшему.
And then David Robert Mitchell's next movie will apparently be about...
Самі создаємо, що він сказав, самі создаємо секрети з возрастом, типу, мир більш скучний, не знаю, скорее в детстве не те, що все загадка, скорее в детстве все постанови, і тебе воно більше подражає. Любить серіали, коли скажуть якісь банальну фігню, а в детстве буде вау, якісь повороти будуть просто чим-то новим, унікальним, скорее чим загадкою. Не скажу, що жизнь очень загадочно стає. Просто, мені кажется, люди з возрастом просто займаються типу виживанням, просто одну і ту ж роботу, одним і тим же займаються, то може у них нема загадок. Но якщо ти захочеш загадки, то можна їх знайти і в взрослій житті. Ті ж науці, думаю, якщо изучати як-небудь фізику, там як-небудь темна енергія, темна матерія, повні загадки можна знайти.
So, we'll see what that's all about. Anyway, let's get deep in those It Follows sheets, shall we? Before the funny business demon arrives to really rock her world, Jay is introduced as a typical young woman right on the cusp of putting childhood behind her forever, soon to go full steam ahead into adulthood. There's a tinge of sadness to Jay. As she looks at herself while getting ready for her date, there's a sense of longing for something more. The 80s-inspired synth score adds to this feeling, expressing a beautiful innocence, with the slightest undertones of sadness and impending disappointment soon to arrive. Like many youngsters, Jay has a desire to be someone she's not, to feel a satisfaction with life she assumes everyone else experiences while she doesn't, which is further emphasized by the game she plays on her date with Hugh.
Pick a person that you'd want to trade places with. They can be
anyone for whatever reason.
Of course, this feeling of unfulfillment within oneself is universal. Every bit as universal as believing when you're young that becoming an adult will be like arriving at a finish line of self-actualization. But the haunting reality of adulthood It Follows dares to define is that it's not the gift of satisfaction the young long for. It's actually the opposite. After going boink in the car with Hugh, Jay expresses this feeling.
I used to daydream about being old enough to go on dates. I
Я
had this
там
image of
тільки
myself
про ощущення, там, щоб якісь свої мрії розказувати Сані, що мечтаю уїхати з того города.
holding hands with
Перший год тоді ми загибається потрохи, там видимо нема перспектив.
a really cute guy. It's having some sort of freedom, I guess. Now that we're old enough. Where the hell do we go?
Знаю,
Jay already has a
сталося, просто похитало.
sense that
Довольно грустно, по-моєму, сцена, де буквально розкриваєш всі мечти парню, а да, вони взяв в борбу
reaching a
пхати.
romanticized
Довольно грустно.
landmark in life is often not the source of gratification it's expected to be. And it's here the movie presents intercourse as Jay's final severance from her innocence. Now, most people's first ever disappointing experience with knocking boots doesn't typically include getting abducted and told they'll be followed by a murderous shape-shifting demon. If it did, well, damn, sorry to hear about that. But the metaphor the movie is touching upon with this traumatic event is the idea of expecting to feel all warm and fuzzy after intercourse, only to inherit a jarringly cold and isolating depression instead. And this, at a very fundamental level, is because Hugh's actual intentions with Jay weren't what he manipulated her into believing they were.
You're moving me in all the right way. Waiting for the
Ну,
signal.
теж ці переходи, як у Хеллоуіні.
Follows explores the after effects of jumping bones primarily from the female perspective. Before getting dumped in the worst way possible by Hugh, Jay is unaware of the fact that his driving motivation with her is to rid himself of a relentless demon he can't shake. She believed they shared something real together, only to find it was all an act. Jay is forced to grow up fast in a sense and realize that intercourse isn't what she imagined it would be, that it's so often used as a means of escaping the most dreadful conditions of a cruel reality.
Хвалять фільм в плані того, що типу дітственніше було лучше, ну не знаю. Не знаю, довольно спорно. Тож, да, як сказав, різні проблеми, да, і в дітстві, звісно, свої плюси, но мінуси теж.
The movie presents
По-моему, из минусов есть то, что вы глупее, у вас мало жизненного опыта, вы, да, мало что знаете.
rather wise insights on the dynamics between males and females when it comes to bumping
Просто
uglies.
більше що спомнити, можете спомнити якусь книгу, фільм, якісь воспоминання більше, в дитинстві мало що. Найбільше з вас там задумуєш, що щось помниш, що раніше, коли спитали якісь фільми, лісали, ми ж нічого по них не думалося, коли більше що думаєш.
Attractive female who's been forced to bear the weight of being used by a man she trusted, Jay is hesitant about just casually passing her demon on to any of her male friends. She has an understanding of the consequences, of the horrifying burden they could inherit. But while Jay keeps smart and measured and takes the repercussions of dawdling very seriously, the guys, well, the guys are guys.
Choosing to ignore these insults to my character?
Greg is in consistent denial of the demon following Jay, chalking it up to a hysterical response to a traumatic incident.
Something happened. It's not what she thinks, okay?
To him, it's just another opportunity to seal the deal with Jay, no strings attached. Following the sealing of said deal, it initially appears as though Greg is above the side effects. He's shown as confident and unfazed.
Have you seen it?
Nothing.
At least on the surface, leading us to consider that perhaps some people have it together well enough to avoid the torment of such a demon. But it ends up being because Greg isn't vigilant to the potentially terrible results that he becomes so easily consumed by the dark entity. The movie poses that even the most alpha
Странно, що він не вірить.
intercourse active males can be hit with the after dread of knock-knocking, no matter how unfazed they may appear on the surface.
Просто вірить і глупо помирає, довольно быстро.
Why'd you pick Greg?
I thought he'd be okay. He wasn't scared.
And then there's Paul.
Hey, Jay.
Hey, Paul.
Paul is your average young man with hearts in his eyes for the woman he believes he should be with. But in reality, he just wants to get his tromboning on.
I could stay over tonight if it would make you feel any better.
No.
Paul is convinced he's in love because he's experiencing such strong feelings of lust. At this stage in life, these feelings seem monumental. But in reality, they can so often be reduced to base desire, a masculine impulse to possess or impose oneself as the alpha, the one deserving of the most desirable female's attention. Paul feels a clear resentment towards Greg for being everything he's not, for taking what he believes should be rightfully his. And while Paul isn't portrayed as an intentionally bad guy by any means, it's his intense lust that causes him to prioritize satisfying his own cravings over truly understanding Jay's personal torment.
I want to help.
Я, конечно, буду смотреть, потому что как-то, не знаю, сложно комментировать, особо как-то мысли, потому что он говорит, нет, там было про взросление детства, поэтому были какие-то мысли, но вот это просто персонажи с фильма «Сказы», как, ну, особенно не знаю, что сказать. Там, такая пол, там, стандартный, предстатный, хороший парень.
And when he finally gets what he wants,
Do you feel any different?
it turns out it's not what he built it up to be.
Do you?
It doesn't satisfy in the way his primal urge convinced him it would.
No.
Despite the fact that It Follows is often interpreted as a condemnation of casual tapping, the movie is more about portraying tap-tap time as a potential trigger for becoming consciously aware of the most disturbing truths about humanity's role in nature. The darkest side of leaving childhood behind for adulthood can be the realization that the world isn't the magical place of wonder it once appeared to be, that people are just another disposable species in the unforgiving survival of the fittest reality they inhabit. The movie portrays the humans it follows as not very spectacular or complex in their
Момент, наверное, з нею
There's a lot of
старая, потім буде говорити, що це страх старіння. Возможно, да, що питається з нею в формі старої бабки, може бути реально ти страхом старіння.
sitting around and staring at screens with nothing very interesting to say at all.
А от той большой чувак, може бути, не знаю, страхом знасилування.
With the social dynamics of intercourse being a driving factor in everyone's thoughts and actions at all time. While most movies portray human interaction and conversation at its most profound and engaging, It Follows boldly depicts it at its most mundane and base-driven. And this is all to convey the unpleasant thought that we're essentially all just sitting around and waiting to die, with the sole purpose of our fleeting little lives being to reproduce, pass on our genes so the never-ending cycle can continue. This is why circular shapes and movements are so prominent throughout the movie, to bring our attention to the concept of the O-face.
Things go well, I might be showing her my O-face. Oh.
No, circles and It Follows represent the hypnotically dull cycle of life we become aware to when our childhood blinders are removed. For example, just after Jay's traumatizing Boink Boink experience, we're shown a close-up shot of the card game her friends are playing. The circular arrangement they're held in communicating the idea that no matter which path you choose in life, whichever identity or career you pursue, it all leads to the same cold, inevitable end of old age and death, represented by the most prominent and connecting card in the middle, the Old Maid. Likewise, the arrangement of these happy childhood photos of Jay circling around us
Да, починає типу крадемо, можемо вибити різну роботу. Не важно, що ми виберемо, так просто ставимося, умремо. Так грустно.
Central picture of young Jay with her grandparents alludes to this unsettling cycle as well. Though she was unaware of it in all of her childhood
На 15 минуті почалась какая-то депресія.
innocence, the curse of decay had already begun, a death sentence that passes from generation to generation, an unmovable truth.
Тут можу как-то, якщо от будучи взрослим, можна сказати, що в взрослій житті є якісь плюсики на Мав'єцькій можна позахищати, то тут вже не можу захищати, може не вважаю, що є щось хороше, тому щоб ставитися і помереть, то вже да, нічого хорошого, по-моєму, нет. По-моему, уже очень плохо. Если можно было бы настарить тогда все на лет 20, я был бы таки за какой-нибудь там гуманизм.
At the center of human existence.
Тут же, да, тут же как-то особо не позахищаешь. Что мы состаримся. Правильно, я не знаю.
But perhaps the
Может,
most
кто-нибудь позахищаешь, и это не так плохо. Ну, я даже не знаю, как.
hitting display of this notion is the circular camera work used in the scene just before Jay and Greg seal the deal in the hospital bed. The shot takes us on an eerily blunt tour through the cycle of human reproduction. The first stop, the initial spark of desire between male and female. Then, an extinguishing spark, a cold distance brought on by the passage of time, followed by procreation and a fading relevance of the parents. And then
довольно грустно. Первое отношения, потом дистанция в отношениях, ребенок в
final
отношениях.
stage, old
И
age,
красиво просто помирает. Довольно грустно описано. У вас отношения, потом у вас отношения все плохо, но появляется ребенок все еще в отношениях, и старается, помирает. Ну да, довольно грустно, что тут описано.
and death. The next shot of an
Жизни.
ill child is a reminder that death isn't guaranteed to keep to this cycle.
І
That
потім ребенок і повторить цей цикл.
even childhood can be corrupted by its sudden cruelty. And finally, the cycle beginning anew with Jay and Greg getting it on to escape an impending dread. The theme of repeating cycles is evident throughout, even adding meaning to the timeless reality the movie exists within. It's been often noted that It Follows has no specific time period, that it exists within a surreal reality where bits and pieces of many different generations can be spotted. From more modernized cars to not so modern television sets and futuristic appliances, like Yara's cool little shell phone she's always reading from. And this is primarily to impart that what Jay is experiencing is not specific to any one generation or time period. The existential dread.
Да, ну можно, не знаю, пытаться что-то досягнуть, войти в историю, как-нибудь прожито достойно. Ну, да, в принципе, интересно тут що суждати про цикл в житті, що повторяєш всі покоління потерпять одне і те ж.
Felt from blossoming into
Заводять сім'ю, передають свої гени далі, старяться і вмирають. Така трошки, да, грустновато.
adulthood has been a core experience of human beings for as long as they've been around. A cyclical rite of passage that always has and always will be fundamental to the human experience.
Фильм ужасів, воно ж слід фільм ужасів, тому, в принципі, не странно. Фільм ужасів якісь негативні моменти человеческой жизни.
The timeless setting also contains a meta layer. The core past influences of It Follows are John Carpenter's Halloween and Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, two movies crucial in cementing the slasher-based concept of young people being followed and blindsided by the abstract representations of death and the unsavory side of adulthood. Something about the ideas set up in these films, the dread of being followed by some unavoidable thing, of being confronted
тоже за девушкой преследовала.
the darkest parts of the reality you inhabit, struck a primal chord in our collective consciousness, leading to a seemingly never-ending cycle of these ideas being used again and again and again. A timeless cycle set on repeat, because there will always be a new generation ready to be initiated into the collective nightmare that unconsciously haunts us all.
Реклама на цих переходах.
One of the most terrifying aspects of the doing it demon is the confounding mystery behind it. What is it? How is it? And why does it like to be naked? Asking these questions can be a lot like asking why Nicole Kidman feels the need to explain to us why we go to the movies while we're already at the movies. We may never truly know. We're left to question, why does this demon wear the masks of the people it wears when it wears them? Or is there no reason behind it at all? And it's simply reflecting the world it inhabits as some natural mirroring method, an ever-shifting kaleidoscope of people it's encountered.
Я забув, вона ж просто пропала. Да. Він задав вопрос, почему оно преследует, брая формы или в этом
At its time in
смысле.
this reality. Though we're presented with some theories,
Sometimes I think it looks like the people you love just to hurt you.
the evidence isn't strong enough for a definitive understanding. And this is so alluring because while similar movie demons, like the one in last year's Smile for instance, provide some context for what they desire,
Because your mind is so inviting.
even displaying a sense of enjoyment in antagonizing its prey.
Almost time, Rose.
The It Follows demon is devoid of any personality, completely expressionless and uncaring in doing what it exists to do. And this lack of knowing the nature of this thing, beyond the fact that it will always move toward you unless you're throwing it off through intercourse, makes it all the more reflective of death itself. We can project our rationalities onto death, try to understand it in ways that it
Кіт, що після реклами попадає. Я, в принципі, не читаю, то на слух питаюся. Но зрителям, лучше б ж не перекладаю, тому буде непонятно людям, які англійські, тому я буду хотів субтитри.
to some form of logic, but in the end, it's an unknowable
Я
mystery.
не зміг би перекласти, я не зміг би, не прям кожне слово.
The only thing we do know for sure is that it will catch up to us eventually, no matter how long it takes. Regardless of whether the demon revels in any of its actions or not, many of the forms it takes touch upon some of the most basic human fears. The nagging inevitability of not only growing old, but physically withering away, unrecognized.
Досі цього першого цього каналу, то що не та старуха, та страх старості. Да, у мене теж присутствує.
Recognizable to your younger self. The disturbing thought of being bound, broken, and turned helpless beyond repair. And when the demon takes the shape of Jay's family members, like her father at the pool or her grandfather on
Такое, хотелось бы менять внешность. Хотелось бы внешность такая, зачем менять-то, то что не взломано. Но, к сожалению, мы не контролируем изменения физиологии.
roof, it's to convey the alienating effect of the kind of depression or dour outlook on the world the demon is metaphorical to, seeing not only strangers, but also those you love and care about.
Глядати все як в 17 чи в 20. Як вічно. Вам було б прикольно. Вот зачем какие-то изменения? Если и так какой-то внешности, зачем привлекать какие-то изменения?
Out as empty,
Но, к сожалению, это не то, что мы контролируем.
lifeless vessels. the comforting and familiar being reshaped into the foreign and distant.
Jay, what do you see? I don't want to tell you.
And this cold distance isn't
Б воля мене б не знаю, одна прическа, доросло б, ніяк не мінялося, ні борода теж не надо, ні внешність би не мінялася. У мене, ну, к сожалению, это не так.
reserved to only being shown through
Кльово.
the Bam Bam Demon. The camera consistently
Стригтися.
emphasizes the back of mane and background
І прокаткною внешність.
characters' heads, placing us in Jay's shoes, making us experience her distrust, giving us an unsettling feeling and unconsciously wanting the camera to show the face, because that's where we discern humanity, where we can get a better sense of intention. The role of the parents in the movie is also where we experience some serious distance. They're barely even seen or
дистанцию над родителями. Ну, вони тут раді устають від роботи в фільмі, просто вирубаються спати. Да, тому да, туди, видимо, трудоголіки і да, тут є серйозна дистанція. Те, що говорив, типу, режисура, так, що показують їх зі затилка, ми хочемо лиця, бо перекликали лицю. Ну, я такий операторський просто ход в деяких сценах. Да. Але, в принципі, хороша режисура, мені понравилося. Цього режисера, як то свій почерк, потом смотрел этот фильм с Гатфилдом, и как кто тоже пауки, это там какие-то сцены тоже как-то снято, что вспоминается этот фильм. Потому что режиссера, в принципе, узнаваемая съемка кадра, некий авторский почерк.
In the rare moments we do get glimpses of them, they're shown as these lifeless background entities. And this is to communicate that what the kids are experiencing, the harsh facts of life they're beginning to comprehend, is a rite of initiation the adults have long since passed through. And now, on the other side of it, they're assigned to a living dead kind of role, hollow shadows of their former younger selves, withering away within the comforting confines of their suburban tombs. Meanwhile, the kids have only each other to help navigate the cruelties they're becoming conscious to. This is the relentlessly bleak stance the movie takes on life, constantly transmitting that it adds up to nothing more than the glorious expectation of childhood, followed by the dreadful decay of adulthood, which is further emphasized by suburban decay, the rotting of the American dream, visualized throughout. The kids rummaging through Hugh's abandoned house imparts a dark and unsanitary side of the clean and kempt suburban homes they've always known. Just as well, the movie is set in Detroit.
Мне кажется, довольно интересным рассуждением, він бере абстрактні проблеми фільму до 56 преслідує, бере піджизненні проблеми тривоги зі там зрослінням, старінням, довольно любопитно.
The city once lush with opportunity and potential as far as the eye could see, before it was abandoned and left behind to deteriorate, a harsh reality our main characters were shielded from throughout their childhood.
When I was a little girl, my parents weren't allowed me to go south of 8 Mile. And I didn't even know what that meant until I got a little older. That's where the city started and the suburbs ended. I had to have permission to go to the state fair with my best friend and her parents, only because it was a few blocks past the border.
Мені щось говорив, типу, Детройт, як його потеря, типу, город, який мав потенціал, ну, от, плохо.
Same thing.
The imagery of death and decay is evident throughout. From food left out for too long before it begins to rot and start the decaying process, to characters shown sleeping in lifeless positions. It's all to reflect the imminent final destination the fresh and innocent perspective of childhood inevitably brings us. The corrosion and eradication of all things from the passage of time. And eradication of all things from the passage of time.
People who contract it often show signs of fear and paranoia. Symptoms also include being eternally followed by a shape-shifting demon.
Through the concept of having smush time in order to shake a dangerous entity, the movie stresses that it's ingrained deep within our DNA to escape approaching predators at all times. With the demon on your trail, you're forced to be in constant primal defense and alert mode. And with this demon being symbolic to an existential awareness, once you reach adulthood and realize death is coming for you, you no longer have time to appreciate life and live in the moment, because you're burdened with knowing that it will catch up to you sooner or later. In modern civilization, we no longer have predators or an essential need to worry about physical threats. Yet it's still within us to run from what can kill us.
Тривога, наверное, у некоторых людей, думаю, є в плані смертності.
Without these pressing environmental dangers, it becomes the abstract threat of aging and dying itself that we feel an instinctual urge to escape. The movie inundates us with characters having primal jump reactions throughout in order...
Наверное, вроде Хайдера, типу, что положительно, що сестра смерті, типу, що може то время то страх, вместо того, щоб займатися якою фігньою, подумати, що дійсно важно. Ну, с одной стороны, да, с другой стороны, не уверен. С одной сторони, можете просто так спати, захотіти щось зробити, і на скору руку йти, не знаю, історію, на скору руку може початися якась фігня. Хто автор комікса, кросовер, яка зробив цей комікс, після того, як чуть не помнити клінічної смерті, він вийшов таке на скору руку. По-моему, може вийти, що хороше, спокійно, медленно, без
to emphasize this natural human response. And just as these are all innate responses to a perceived threat, being driven by a constant urge to do the naughty is also a natural trait ingrained in us in order to spread our genes before death can finally catch up to us. And through this, we get caught in an insatiable cycle of desiring intercourse, then having intercourse, followed by the primal urge to escape.
Тільки розсуждення, які депресивні. Хоча можна питати, що смерть хоча очень негативна, да, но можна було питатися, що позитивно, типу, що дома, не знаю, цінуємо время, яке в нас є, мало, но може то более, не знаю, цінне, якщо було б безкінечно, то було б менее цінне.
An existential shadow, causing the cycle to immediately begin again from the start. The ending of It Follows tends to raise more questions than it answers. Like, what happened to the demon after that pool scene? And did Paul do Bam in the Ham with that Lady of the Night?
Oh.
Well, it would appear there are two key interpretations we could take away from the ending. One somewhat positive, and the other pretty downright cynical. Water throughout the movie symbolizes childhood innocence. Before she's smacked with the cold reality of adulthood, Jay's shown basking in her element, floating...
Невинність, детство запитує, як представляє. Ну, в кінці, воно вроді допомагає їй поначалу, в самому фіналі, де вона чуть не тоне від того монстра, тоді вже перестає допомагати. Помню. Концовка, без сказать, что монстра убили, все хорошо относительно. Опять там не совсем хорошо, в том смысле, что мы же избавились, но жизнь все одно главной героине не очень хорошая. Она бы хотела бы вот уехать из Детройта, там, где нет никаких перспектив, вот, так понимаю, загибается, но... И когда в конце жена уезжает, то у нее все не очень хорошо, но теперь хотя бы ничего не угрожает. Но концовка такая не очень позитивна, но не сказать, чтобы негативно, скорее хорошая, но все же не очень.
And tranquility. But when she catches the nasty later on, we consistently see her distance from that happy place, with the solid concrete earth symbolizing the hard ground of adulthood she now has to stand on. Jay is shown further and further removed from the element of water as the movie goes on, with her pool eventually shown drained and broken down, just as Jay herself has become. The significance of water is also teased in the prologue just before the first victim of the movie bites it. As she sits and awaits death on the dry ground of the beach, the water behind her can be heard, but barely made out at all. It's been consumed by the pitch darkness of night. The gang attempting to kill the demon in the public pool is reflective of an attempt to hold on to innocence, to return to it as a means of defeating the dread of adulthood. They at first try to use electric appliances, various staples of suburban living, against it, but this has no effect on the demon. It just turns these tools against them. Domestic comforts prove to not be a very useful way of tricking the demon. So, after they seemingly kill the demon below the surface of the water, the question is, was this enough to keep it away for good? The blood of the demon consuming the water shows us that Jay's innocence is forever tainted by what she now understands about adulthood. But if the demon is dead, then there's a slightly hopeful takeaway from the ending, communicating that innocence is something we can return to as a way of detaching ourselves from the existential dread of adulthood, an outlook or a mentality.
Можна інтерпретувати, якщо монстр помер, що ми можемо вернутися в дитинство, временно, чи типа того, какие-то детские черти, типу невинність, да, вернутися, ну, не знаю. Мені здається, в мене були періоди времени, де я смотрел что-то с детства, какие-нибудь сериалы или что-то типа этого, пришел себе к тому ложу в плане мышления, потому что смотришь, допустим, общение персонажей, допустим, дети в них более какое-то простое, как будто сам начинаешь копировать, и мысль немножко больше как тобі детське свойственно было. Но я бы не сказала, что это, мне кажется, нельзя вернуться, можно хіба временно, вот. Это довольно быстро подходит, даже если что посмотреть, таки детское, или, не знаю, почитати щось, що делал в детстве, посмотреть какой-нибудь сериал, то ти можеш вернутися на день-два, но це буде на день-два, не на руке, типу, быстро прийде ощущение, воно не буде навечно. В детстве ты постоянно був в форме ребенка, ты ж був ребенком. В взрослом состоянии, кажется, нет, в взрослом состоянии ты можешь только временно вернуться, там, на день-два, что посмотреть, что смотрел в детстве, я не знаю, какой детский дневник почитать, но это не работает навсегда.
We can go back to be cleansed by. However, given how relentlessly dour this movie is, I'm not buying it. The cynical ending would tell us that the demon was not killed, that attempting to return to the pools of innocence can never truly shake it. Jay and Paul coupling up together would be an acceptance of the reality of adulthood, that you simply choose someone to live out the rest of your days in suburban confinement with, sharing your inherited dread and attempting to make the best of it as you keep one step ahead of your crippling existential reality, knowing it will one day catch up to you and be the end of you both. The final moments of the movie give us one shot of someone following just behind Jay and Paul. Maybe the demon, maybe not, as a nearby man rakes leaves, creating a nagging, scratching noise that represents the demon's ever-presence. And then the final shot of the two young adults walking hand in hand as children laugh and play ahead of them. One shot alluding to the bleak conclusion, the other to an ongoing presence of innocence and happiness, whichever represents the film's final word is up to us.
There is no known cure for it. All you can do is pass it on.
It Follows is a movie that, yes, I'm gonna say it, follows you long after you watch it because it touches on ideas that feel both intimately personal and infinitely universal at the same time. No matter what anyone's specific...
Фильм одновременно очень личный, одновременно универсальный. Но если ж мы ставимся и умрем, или что мы повторяем эволюционно, размножаемся, то, ну да, это, наверное, лично и всех касается.
Interpretation of the movie entails, there's a psychological disturbance at the core that scratches its way into our innermost existential fears. It manifests and makes physical the maddening yet commonplace understanding that we will someday die and cease to exist.
I think that if one is faced with inevitable destruction, one must feel a great longing to sit down, close one's eyes, and wait.
That no matter what we do to try and shut it out, death creeps closer and closer with each passing moment, rigged to win in an unforgiving game we never asked to play.
Этот фильм, тут сказал девушку, как-то демон, бегая из них обличья, как страх смерти, какой-то экзистенциализм, я не знаю, Сад Камю, так ощущение существования.
When there's torture, there's pain and wounds, and all this distracts the mind from mental
прекрасно,
suffering.
это делает фильм более глубокий.
One is tormented by the wounds until the moment of death.
Не, насколько она есть в фильме, и, конечно, можно будет что-то... Это не буде прям совсем какой-нибудь скрытый смысл валить, що літо питався. Это не буде совсем натягування на глобус, но все же напрямую в самому фільмі це не говориться.
It's the type of movie that can assist in cathartically confronting the truths that so many of us keep subconsciously weighed down. The burdensome thought that at the intersection of expectation and satisfaction awaits the haunting reality of disappointment and unfulfillment. And there can be a strange sense of comfort in making sense of these things through the prism of horror, in being reminded that we all experience them, that we all can't stop the inevitable.
And the most terrible agony may not be in the wounds themselves, but in knowing for certain that within an hour,
we can only spend our lives running in circles,
then within 10 minutes,
that will inevitably bring us to the same,
then within half a minute,
dreadful,
at this very instant,
destination.
Your soul will leave your body, and you will no longer be a person. And that this is certain. The worst thing is that it is certain.
Все, да? Ну, в принципе, посмотрели. Ну, неплохо. Да, довольно депрессивно у него трактовка фильма, конечно, но интересно было слушать. Фильм о страхе смерти, страхе взросления.